In ancient times, Hammerfell was protected by an order of godly warriors. They were trained in the way of the sword, unmatched by any across Nirn in their prowess with the blade. Their art is now lost to time, but Hammerfell has not forgotten them. They were Hammerfell's own Jedi order, wielding sabers of light and magic. They could cut down stone walls and deflect arrows from mid-air. This is the story of the Sword Singers. The more I read about the Sword Singers, the more I realized just how freaking OP they were. They take us back to the first era on Yakuda, the continent that the Redguards originated from, but before it was destroyed. The Sword Singers were a group of mystics, artists, poets, and philosophers that began to mix their great knowledge and mysticism with how they learned to wield the blade in battle. Thrandar's ilk were artisans who valued beauty in the smithing of magnificent blades tempered with magic. They became more than merely warriors, but drew upon their artisanship and scholarly devotion in their training. It was a philosophy that became as much about mastery of oneself, one's fears, of one's mind and its weaknesses, as it was about the mastery of the blade itself. Their magic was unknown and alien. The people of the blade kept their poetry and artistry in building beautiful swords woven with magic and powers from the unknown gods. But this connection to the gods was deeper than any we know of in the history of Tamriel. It's possible that they describe it as alien and unknown because this art is entirely lost now. No one knows the way of the Shahai, of the Unsee, the Sword Singers. But it is something of a divine power, as the Book of Circles, something of a philosophical religious text for them, calls on Onsi, their warrior god. But the greatest skilled among the Sword Singers did not just create blades enchanted with divine and unknown magics. No, they could create the Shahai, supernatural blades constructed out of sheer force of will. It was a form of mind mastery, whereby an image of a sword is formed from pure thought. By concentrating, it takes shape in his hand. It is usually a pale thing of light, misty and insubstantial. Those Unsee of the highest level would then in times of stress form a spirit sword. They are wielding sabers of light, and if that sounds familiar, it's because... yeah. This group of such devotion and skill to their unknown warrior gods were known as the Unsee. At first, a blade of magic and light may seem like a bound sword, something that anyone can use, that we play with in the game. But the descriptions of their powers, of what they look like and what they can do, tell us that they are something far more deep, powerful, and ancient. Firstly, the wielders had special favour from the warrior stars. They had meditated so fully on that constellation that they could reach through those windows to whatever lay beyond. And this favour from godlike beings is no myth. When the celestial warrior himself descended to fight, he summoned a Shahai of his own in a blinding flash of light, the very blade that the Unsee would wield. The Unsee were drawing on this divine constellational power, something otherworldly, not just summoning a blade. Secondly, this description in particular is pertinent. A Shahai is far more than light and air. It is an unstoppable weapon of great might, a weapon that can never be taken from the owner without also taking his mind. It's that last part that I find fascinating, because to me this speaks of how intimately connected their Shahai is to their personal philosophy, their mental acumen, their wisdom and knowledge. It was tied in with their power. If they did not have balance within themselves, then they would be unable to summon the Shahai. It was mastery of themselves that gave them that ability. It meant that they were always armed, because they could always summon a blade to defend themselves. The Unsee had powers in wielding their Shahai unlike any warriors on Tamriel since. The Pocket Guide to the Empire implies that the Unsee could use it to manipulate earth and stone itself, while another passage suggests the following: you will outreach daggers, roll from under heavy hammer blows, and deflect the arrows of your foe. Deflecting the arrows of your foe! That is the kind of speed, agility, and the precision that the Unsee had. That is absolutely amazing, and I would love to be able to see that happen in-game in some fashion. Another story involved the Unsee using their Shahai to close breaches breaches in the very fabric of space and time itself. They hurled the swords together into the void, and sealing forever the giant goblins in the void between their world and ours. What kind of power is that? No one has that sort of power usually, and that's not the end of it. One story of 4 legendary Unsee said that they would cut through walls as easily as wading through a river, while another said this: "Oh, I slew mightily, right and left, like a scythe through wheat. With one blow I cut his magical armor asunder." These last 2 quotes are interesting, because the Shahai seems to be able to cut through stone, armor, and people and flesh like air, with no resistance. This particular proclivity reminds me of a lightsaber, as I'm sure it has occurred to you. And yeah, or even better, the shards from Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives, which are these mythical blades that could cut through any sort of material with ease. That is one hell of an array of powers, and they should hope to rival the Jedi if they ever came up against them, powers that go beyond the physical world. Finally, we talked about this last video. There was the Pancrato sword technique that could bring about a magical cataclysm, and it is likely what destroyed Yakuda, obliterating the very laws of nature, tearing atoms apart themselves. Luckily, that technique was lost to time, and very few of the Unsee could even do it. If you want to learn more about what caused the destruction of Yakuda, go watch the first part in the series where we talk about that particular sword technique. And the Shahai also looked spectacular. On each blade is inscribed part of an intricate message on how to use the power of the swords combined, and Michaela Leckie, one of the later Unsee, noted that her spirit sword, the mystical blade mind-formed of pure thought with serpents intertwined with vines of roses, came to form the blade, as beautiful as. It seems that all of the Shahai were different, unique to the user in their design. There's no standard form of a Shahai. Yet the sword singers were as adept in philosophy as they were with the blade. But what did they actually believe? Faith was incredibly important to them, and even though they built the first temple to their unknown gods of war and built a training hall, the halls of the virtues of war, so we can see that they have some form of principles to begin with, they didn't truly have a single cohesive philosophy until one of the greatest of the Unsee, Frandar Hunding, wrote a text called the Book of Circles. However, while they supposedly followed unknown gods, we do know that the warrior god Unsee was always important to them, and it was Leckie, the goddess, who taught the Unsee a sword move called the Ephemeral Feint. But it was the Book of Circles that truly unified their philosophy and has since become a crucial text to the Redguards, to the point that every household now keeps a copy of it above their hearth. Frandar Hunding wrote the Book of Circles in the year 780 of the First Era after a life of war. To give an example of what they believe and what it says, it lists 38 grips, 750 offensive and 1800 defensive positions, and nearly 9,000 moves essential to sword mastery. And it contains philosophies such as that anger is a crack in a hull that sinks a ship, and to shed the mantle of fear is to cast it on your enemy. It was their path to enlightenment through the blade, a way through the chaos of war. But arguably, their most critical belief was that they had a wholehearted faith in the way of the sword over any other weapon. The sword is our soul. Mighty Unsee showed our people in ancient days the ways to lengthen blades. Focus on it alone, and you will defeat every weapon. If you are distracted from the blade's way, you will only be confused and the path of mastery will disappear beneath your feet. This is partly why magic users or bowmen are seen as cowardly or unskilled in Redguard society, because the way of the blade is the only power that the warrior supposedly needs, and with powers like we've mentioned before, it's no surprise that they think that. It's a sense of, if you only perfect yourself, then you can become all-powerful. Like most Redguards, they had a strong hatred for the undead, and this was actually why Frandar's feat in defeating Lord Janik and his 7 Lich Guardians was so impressive. And another story notes that a group of Unsee sacrificed their Shahai to create wards against a necromantic power with TwotheFuture. But how do you become a master of the Shahai? While they do have their own rituals, it would involve a great trial that they called the Walkabout, a wilderness trek emulating the times of Frandar Hunding. Some of us in our hall took years to finish. Always there is danger. We 6 maidens each returned in our own good time, but many are they who do not return from the walkabout. Males would be called the Brothers of the Blade, while females would be called the Maidens of the Spirit Sword. But don't let the word maidens confuse you, they weren't celibate as far as we know. We know that Frendar Hunding had children of his own, their greatest figure, though that may have eventually changed over time. Frendar Hunding grew up in this society and gave it shape. He gave it a cohesive philosophy and he led them into greatness. He made it so that there was an organized religious order to it. He went on about the countryside defeating monsters, performing quests of virtue, staying ethical and good, defending the common peoples, and that was the way that they lived for much of their time. He was essentially invincible by the age of 30 and would have plenty of people coming after him just to kill him to prove their own mettle. He eventually went through about 90 different duels, all of which he won. If you want to know how and why they destroyed their homeland, this holy order of ethical knights of some kind, then go watch the first part in this series, because eventually there would be war. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider supporting me over here on Patreon. We have our own little Elder Scrolls community where we talk about the lore as well as any of the other video topics that I make on this channel. It's an amazing little Discord community that I really love. Question of the day: which is your favourite historical blade? I mean, a style. My personal favourite, I think, would be the hulking Scottish claymore. I may have used it a bit in Morrowind, so I might be a bit biased. But in the meantime, come follow me over on my Twitter, and Facebook, other social media. Otherwise, email me stuff you may enjoy, and links in the description below. Stay nerdy, Subfuries, and I will see you in the future.